Money can't buy class, and these wealthy Karens learned that the hard way. Hi, I'm Timothy, and today we look at 6 stories where Karen's entitlement carried a devastating price. From a Karen who tripped and crashed over her own IV pole after surgery, to another who chased a sold-out handbag into disaster, ending in the craziest way possible. It was September 18, 2013. Houston was hot and sticky that afternoon, with temperatures hovering around 90 degrees. Inside the hospital's recovery wing, things were quiet. Nurses were doing their routine rounds, and families were just waiting on discharge paperwork. In a private suite nearby was 62-year-old Georgina Diane Lopez. She was a Texas hotel owner who had spent her entire career getting exactly what she wanted. She was sharp, tireless, and used to being in charge. People who knew her well said she just couldn't stand being told no. To her, a rule wasn't a stop sign. It was just something to get around. Getting her own way and staying in total control were the same thing to her. If you ask me, that's just asking for trouble. She'd just had surgery to tighten her midsection after losing a lot of weight, and the operation was a total success. By early afternoon, she was cleared to go home. The doctors gave her a few simple, non-negotiable rules. Don't walk alone, keep the compression binder on, and call a nurse if you need to stand. Her husband was right there, hearing exactly how important this was. But Georgina wasn't having it. She flat out refused to leave. When the insurance company wouldn't pay for another night, she started fighting everyone, the floor manager, the surgeons, even threatening to sue them. Her husband begged her to just come home, but she dug her heels in. Over the next couple of hours, the nurses warned her 3 separate times not to get up on her own. Finally, around 2:30, she'd had enough. She ripped off her monitor leads and tossed her compression binder onto a chair, finished with playing the patient. Almost immediately after disconnecting herself, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and tried to stand without waiting for anyone. She took maybe 6 shaky steps before her foot caught the IV pole. According to witnesses, her midsection twisted sharply, a painful, sudden move her body just couldn't handle. She reached for a chair, missed, and hit the floor hard. Nurses were in the room within 20 seconds, but she was already pale, sweating, and crashing. They got her into emergency surgery within 18 minutes, and during the operation, they saw that the impact had caused severe internal wound damage and massive internal bleeding. Even though they pumped 7 bags of blood into her, they just couldn't stop the damage. Her heart gave out on the table at 6:47 that evening, and she was gone by 7:02. It's just heartbreaking to think about her husband waiting just down the hall, only to lose her in a single silent heartbeat. The coroner eventually ruled it an accidental death. The surgery simply hadn't had the necessary time to heal, and that one clumsy fall blew everything apart. State investigators and the medical board meticulously checked the footage and the paperwork, and the hospital was completely cleared of any blame. Everything had been done strictly by the book. Georgina treated medical advice like it was optional, and her body paid the price. A few years later, another woman would ignore an even more urgent set of instructions, this time during a life-or-death emergency. It was February 11, 2016. Chicago was gripped by a deep, bone-chilling freeze, the kind of biting cold where the wind whipping off Lake Michigan cuts right through your layers and settles into your marrow. Inside the Lakeshore Grand, however, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast. The lobby was a sanctuary of climate-controlled calm, all polished marble and hushed professional efficiency as the city began its morning rhythm. Then there was Beverly Gale Marchetti. Beverly lived by a rigid, unspoken hierarchy. The world was neatly sorted into the right kind of people and everyone else. At 64, she was a retired finance executive who carried her status like armor. According to people who knew her, to be around her was a little bit exhausting. She was the sort of person who would fire off a formal complaint because a neighbor's television was too bright or their footsteps sounded too heavy after 10 o'clock at night. She lived in a 40th floor penthouse and saw the building's rules as optional. She was used to things going her way and expected the high-rise's systems to be managed for her personal convenience. At 8:14 a.m., an electrical spark started a fast-moving fire on the 10th floor. Thick, acrid smoke quickly filled the hallways, and the fire department arrived within minutes as the building's emergency plans kicked in. It always strikes me how quickly a normal morning can completely unravel the moment something like this happens. When the firm, clear voice came over the intercom, ordering everyone to use the stairs and stay away from the elevators, the tenants listened. Everyone, that is, except for Beverly. She stepped out toward the elevator bank, took one look at her neighbors rushing toward the stairs, and decided the stairwell just wasn't for her. She actually walked up to a firefighter in the hallway, standing her ground and demanding to be escorted through the lobby. She felt using a service exit was beneath her, an indignity she refused to accept. When the firefighter didn't budge and repeated that she had to follow the evacuation path, she didn't give in. Instead, she bypassed him and darted toward a service elevator that, in all the chaos, had been left unmonitored. A classic mistake that I still can't believe happened. She stepped inside, the doors sliding shut behind her with a finality that sealed her fate, which is the kind of cold, quiet ending that gives me chills every time I think about it. At 8:31, the elevator suddenly shuddered and stopped between the 22nd and 23rd floors, trapping Beverly inside the dark shaft. Beverly mashed the emergency call button, but in the chaos of the 10th floor fire, no one answered. The silence was sudden and terrifying. By then, the chimney effect of the building had taken hold. Thick, toxic smoke was already curling into the elevator shaft like a living thing. She was trapped in a small metal box that was rapidly filling with deadly toxic smoke and combustion gases. Firefighters managed to triangulate her position roughly 12 minutes later, but they had to fight through a wall of impenetrable, blinding smoke just to reach the shaft. When they finally pried the doors open at 8:57, the scene was haunting. Beverly was sitting on the floor of the elevator, her head lolled back. There was not a single burn on her skin. She had simply succumbed to the invisible, odorless gas. They rushed her to the hospital, but it was far too late. It's absolutely chilling to think that in her effort to avoid a minor inconvenience, she walked directly into a silent, invisible trap. Afterwards, the building management vowed never to let it happen again. They completely overhauled their software so that the moment a fire alarm trips, every single elevator button in the building is electronically locked, rendering them immobile before a resident can even reach the panel. They made it physically impossible for anyone else to make the same fatal mistake she did. And years later, another woman would let a public argument cloud her judgment, taking one impulsive step into a place she never should have been. It was a perfect Saturday in Scottsdale, November 2nd, 2019. The sky was clear, the temperature hovered around 78 degrees, and the busy valet area was filled with shoppers carrying designer bags as luxury cars moved steadily through the narrow pickup lane. Then there was Camille Jean Foster. At 61, she was a fixture in Scottsdale's high-end social scene. After her husband, a powerhouse developer, passed away, she stepped into a life built on that legacy. You would usually spot her at exclusive charity luncheons or private clubs, and she made it her mission to ensure the staff at every luxury boutique knew exactly who she was. She was protective of her public image and didn't handle it well when things didn't go her way, especially in front of other people. She was rarely seen without her toy poodle tucked under her arm, an accessory that seemed to match her brittle, high-maintenance energy. That afternoon, she was there to pick up some alterations, but the routine trip took a sharp turn. As she headed toward a storefront, she crossed paths with a United States Army veteran and his trained service dog. However, for some reason, Camille took massive offense to the presence of the animal. She started making a scene, complaining so loudly that store security had to step in. They patiently tried to explain that federal law protects service animals, but Camille wasn't interested in the law. She treated their calm, professional response like a personal insult, her voice rising in a jagged, shrill crescendo until a crowd started gathering. People were already pulling out their phones to record, but the veteran didn't even engage. He just stared forward, stoic, while she completely lost her cool. According to investigations, when she didn't get her way, she turned on her heel and stomped off toward the valet area. The attendants had already warned people twice to stay behind the yellow-painted safety line because it was an active zone for heavy traffic. But Camille, well, still vibrating with the adrenaline of her argument, marched right past the boundary without breaking stride. Instead of staying on the pedestrian side, she stepped into the narrow vehicle lane and continued walking alongside a row of large decorative stone planters that separated the valet driveway from the storefront walkway. At that exact moment, a luxury SUV was slowly pulling toward the pickup zone. The driver spotted Camille and slammed on the brakes to avoid striking her, bringing the vehicle to a stop only a few feet away. Camille instinctively moved sideways toward the planters to get out of its path, leaving herself standing in the tight space between the SUV's front end and one of the massive stone barriers. But the danger wasn't over. Because the SUV had stopped so suddenly, a large commercial box truck following behind couldn't compensate in time. Its tires screeched, leaving dark rubber streaks across the pavement as it skidded for roughly 14 feet before crashing into the rear of the SUV. The collision hurled the SUV forward. With nowhere left to move, Camille was crushed between the advancing front of the SUV and the immovable stone planter. The gap had been barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it disappeared in an instant. The impact pinned her against the solid masonry with devastating force before anyone nearby had time to react. It's honestly hard for me to wrap my head around how one impulsive step can turn an ordinary afternoon into such a catastrophic reality. By the time the paramedics swarmed the scene, the chaos had transformed into a stunned, horrified silence. The medical examiner later confirmed that her internal injuries were simply too severe to survive. There were no underlying medical issues, no heart attack, no logical explanation. She had simply stepped into a danger zone she was clearly warned about, driven by a stubborn refusal to pause. In the end, it was ruled a tragic, avoidable accident. The truck driver faced no charges. The surveillance footage confirmed the staff had done everything right by shouting those warnings and maintaining the lanes. As for the veteran, he wasn't even there when the collision happened. In a final, quiet contrast to the way Camille had treated him that day, he later donated money from an unrelated legal settlement to an organization that trains service dogs, ensuring that the legacy of that afternoon ended with a gesture of grace rather than the bitterness Camille had left behind. Now, this next woman wasn't surrounded by traffic. She was surrounded by aircraft, and she believed airport security rules were just another inconvenience. It was June 7, 2017, at a regional airport just south of Denver. It was one of those flat, gray mornings where everything on the tarmac seemed to be working like clockwork. You could hear the constant hum of the jet engines, the clatter of equipment, and that sharp, biting smell of jet fuel in the air. Everything and everyone was moving with total focus, except for one person. Victoria Ann Morrow was 58, a relentless operator who rose from a cramped two-room rental in Pueblo. She built a luxury real estate empire by aggressively pursuing deals others avoided, transforming abandoned properties into high-end condos. She wasn't the type to charm you with soft manners. She was impatient, blunt, and had zero tolerance for anything she saw as a waste of her time. To Victoria, her private jet wasn't just a way to get around. It was a loud, metallic proclamation of just how far she'd actually climbed. That morning, her plane was fueled. But there was a snag. The fuel truck was busy with another jet. When the guy at the desk calmly told her she had to wait her turn just like everyone else, Victoria didn't take it well. She tried the tired, aggressive, "Do you know who I am?" routine, snapping that she paid more in taxes than some entire towns. The clerk didn't budge. He stayed polite, but firm. Fed up, she did something reckless. She saw someone walking through the secure badge access door to the ramp and slipped in right behind them. Completely ignoring the glowing red signs warning of a restricted area, ground crew members noticed her almost immediately. A guy marshalling planes started jogging toward her. Pilots in nearby cockpits were waving their arms, and cargo handlers were shouting into the wind. Within 15 seconds, at least 6 different workers were trying to wave her down. Victoria, however, wasn't even watching where she was going. Her ego was fully in the driver's seat. She was still looking back toward the terminal with her jaw set, effectively arguing with the air itself. Without realizing it, she walked behind a Hawker 800 XP that had just been cleared to taxi, stepping directly into the aircraft's jet blast area. The pilots had zero chance of seeing her near the tail. When they throttled up, everything changed in a heartbeat. The jet blast hit her like a physical wall. It wasn't just a gust of wind, but an explosive column of jet exhaust, powerful enough to hurl a person off their feet. She didn't even have a split second to brace herself. She was snatched off her feet as if gravity had simply shut off, thrown 12 feet backward like a rag doll before slamming into a heavy steel barrier. Emergency crews reached her in 2 minutes, but the impact had been too much. It's devastating how, in the time it takes to lose your temper, you can lose everything else too. The coroner's report later explained the horrific physics of it. It wasn't the jet exhaust itself that killed her. It was the sheer kinetic energy of the impact. The force of the jet blast had thrown her with such velocity that the blunt force trauma was instantaneous. The investigation was crystal clear. The flight crew had followed every protocol and never stood a chance of seeing her. The airport eventually installed high-tech gates to make sure nobody could ever tailgate their way onto the ramp again. But for Victoria, it was a brutal final reminder that some rules aren't just suggestions. They are the only thing keeping reality from crashing in. Up next, a woman crossed a different kind of line, ignoring repeated engineering warnings because postponing her event simply wasn't an option in her mind. It was May 14, 2020, in Naples, Florida. Gray skies and a steady Gulf breeze kept the country club terrace pleasantly cool as around 200 members gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The force behind the event was Isolde Brenner. At 59, the Vienna-born designer had spent 3 decades defining high-end interiors across Europe before moving to Naples to marry Robert Brenner III. While some of the local social circle might have brushed her off as just Robert's wife, she was actually a relentless perfectionist. She didn't just want to participate in the club culture, she wanted to curate it. This pickleball court renovation was her magnum opus. Her vision, her design, her obsession, and unfortunately, her ego. She had commissioned ornate shade canopies imported directly from a specialized workshop in Italy. They were visually stunning, sharp, sophisticated, and exactly the kind of aesthetic statement she loved to make. However, they were incomplete. The center canopy, the absolute centerpiece of her grand design, had failed to earn the final sign-off from the project's structural engineer. Days before the gala, the engineer had sent an urgent, unambiguous warning. The central structure's anchor bolts were dangerously unstable and required immediate reinforcement before anyone could safely stand beneath it. The club's general manager had hand-delivered that warning to Isolde 48 hours before the event. She read the note, weighed the risk, and just decided to ignore it. It honestly blows my mind how someone can see a big, clear warning sign about danger, look right at it, and just decide to ignore it because they're in too much of a rush to care. It's like she convinced herself that because she had willed this project into existence, the laws of physics would somehow bend to accommodate her schedule. On the morning of the ribbon cutting, the Weather Service issued a caution. Wind gusts were expected to hit 31 miles per hour. Contractors on site that morning noticed something that turned their stomachs. The center canopy looked like it was held together by little more than hope. 3 of the base bolts were barely hand-tight, lacking the necessary torque to anchor a structure of that size. The workers reported the problem to their site supervisor and urged that the ceremony be delayed, but they were told the concerns had already been raised and the event would move forward as scheduled. She was in full command, weaving through the crowd, making sure the ceremony stayed locked to a 10 o'clock start time. She wasn't just managing an event, she was stage managing her own legacy. At 7 minutes past 10, the board president stepped up to the podium. Isolde stood beside him, clutching the ceremonial scissors, looking absolutely radiant. The picture of a woman who had successfully executed her vision. At 9 minutes past 10, a violent gust of wind tore across the terrace, scattering programs and napkins like confetti. The center canopy shuddered, emitting a sharp, metallic groan that cut right through the chatter. Then a second, even fiercer gust hit. In a heartbeat, the base plate ripped free from the concrete, snapping like a dry twig. The entire assembly, 1,400 pounds of reinforced steel, buckled. It collapsed in less than 2 seconds, a lethal metal curtain dropping onto the stage. The frame struck Isolde instantly, pinning her against the concrete. The impact was catastrophic, but she didn't lose consciousness right away. For about a minute and a half, her voice cut through the chaos, calling out for help as the crowd watched in paralyzed horror. People rushed forward, desperate to lift the weight, but the way the steel had fallen made it impossible to move. By the time emergency crews arrived with heavy hydraulic gear, she was gone. She was pronounced dead at 10:43. The autopsy confirmed the cause: catastrophic crush injuries to her chest and spine. While authorities officially ruled it an accident, the insurance investigators told a different story. They found the ignored engineering report. The project had bypassed basic safety requirements, all because she refused to cancel. It honestly breaks my heart to think that she died for a ceremony, that she valued the aesthetic perfection of a morning over the reality of her own life. The club had to shut the courts for nearly 2 years. They didn't reopen until early 2022, after the damaged canopy system was completely removed, redesigned, and rebuilt to meet engineering requirements. When the new courts finally opened, Robert Brenner III was nowhere to be found. It's a brutal reminder that no matter how much control we think we have, we can't bargain with physics. Some things, like structural integrity, don't care about your status or your plans. What part of this story do you think is the most frustrating, given that the disaster was so preventable? And now our final story is driven by the same sense of entitlement. Except this time, the fight wasn't over a construction project. It was over a handbag that had already been sold. It was December 12th, 2019. Beverly Hills was crowded with holiday shoppers as luxury boutiques filled with customers looking for limited edition releases. Behind the storefronts, delivery trucks moved through narrow service alleys where employees unloaded merchandise and security kept the public away from active loading areas. Evelyn Claire Norwood was 56 and one of the best-known faces in Los Angeles charity circles. After building a fortune through luxury real estate investments, she became obsessed with exclusivity. She believed expensive items weren't just purchases, they were proof of status. Being told she couldn't have something, especially in front of other shoppers, felt like a personal humiliation she simply refused to accept. That afternoon, she arrived hoping to buy a limited edition designer handbag released earlier that morning. Unfortunately for her, every single bag had already been reserved weeks before. The sales associate politely confirmed there were no extras and offered to place her on a waiting list. Evelyn refused to believe it. She accused the staff of hiding inventory for wealthier customers and demanded that the manager search the stockroom again. When the manager showed her the reservation list, she noticed another customer leaving with the final handbag inside its branded shopping bag. Instead of accepting defeat, Evelyn followed the customer outside and into the employee delivery corridor behind the boutique, convinced another bag was being hidden in the loading area. Security immediately called after her, explaining the corridor was restricted because trucks were actively unloading merchandise. Apparently, a warehouse employee also motioned for her to stay behind the yellow safety markings, but she ignored both warnings and continued toward the loading dock. At that moment, a box truck was reversing toward the dock under the direction of a spotter. The driver was moving slowly while watching his mirrors, but Evelyn had stepped into the narrow gap beside the truck's hydraulic liftgate, where neither the driver nor the spotter could see her. A simple, fatal misstep that just goes to show you should never walk behind heavy equipment if you want to keep breathing. She was still looking toward the warehouse entrance instead of paying attention to the truck behind her. As the truck finished backing into position, the hydraulic liftgate began lowering for unloading. Evelyn suddenly found herself trapped between the descending steel platform and the solid concrete loading dock wall. Workers heard the impact and immediately shouted for the driver to stop, though, honestly, by then, it was already way too late. Security called emergency services while employees rushed toward her, but the crushing force had already caused devastating injuries to her chest and abdomen, the kind of brutal reality that makes me lose sleep just thinking about how quickly a life can be snuffed out. Paramedics arrived in approximately 6 minutes and transported her to a nearby trauma center. Despite emergency surgery, the damage to her internal organs was too severe. She died later that afternoon, surrounded by her family. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was catastrophic crush injuries caused by compression between the hydraulic liftgate and the loading dock structure. Surveillance footage showed warehouse employees repeatedly warning Evelyn to leave the restricted area before the truck began reversing. Investigators found the driver and dock crew had followed standard unloading procedures, and no criminal charges were filed. Following the incident, the shopping district required luxury retailers to install locked security gates separating customer walkways from delivery corridors during business hours, a change that really should have been obvious from the start if anyone had just been thinking clearly. The handbag Evelyn had desperately wanted was eventually donated by its original purchaser to a charity fundraiser supporting retail workers, where it sold for nearly twice its original price. A quiet, almost poetic reminder that some things simply aren't worth demanding, no matter how much you think you need them.